Hello everybody and welcome to Decoding the WSL, the podcast dedicated to the stats and facts in the WSL. We are looking ahead to game week 8 this week. There are a couple of local derbies and there's a big game at the top of the table. I'm going to be giving you all the numbers and the stats you need to look ahead to this weekend's games. I'm your host, Biccarino. Yes, hello listener and welcome to this Game Week 8 review, looking ahead to this weekend's games in the WSL. I am your host, Sam Biccarino, and it's currently, Wednesday evening as I record, probably Thursday by the time you're listening to this, maybe even Friday. If you haven't listened to my review episode, please go and do that. I had the wonderful duo from the YOAShe podcast, Charlie and Matt, on this week. It was a really fun pod to record, and we even played a bit of Know Your Stat at the end, which for those that listened when we started the pod before the start of the season, you'll know that game, and it's all good fun. So go and check that out if you haven't yet. My Team of the Week episode is also up for you to sort of listen at your own leisure. But today we're having a look ahead to the matches this weekend. So let's just have a quick overview of what's coming up. This weekend starts at the Amex, where Brighton are going to be hoping to spend their lunchtime cashing in a win versus West Ham. Then, fresh from a successful trip to Italy in midweek, Arsenal don't have quite so far to go this time, as they're off to the North London Derby at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Saturday's matches finish with the top two, as Chelsea look to maintain their 100% record at home against an unbeaten Man City. Then on Sunday, the 2pm game sees two of the bottom three face each other as Villa host Palace. The second local derby of the weekend, this time in Merseyside, is at 3pm when Everton host Liverpool, and at the same time is Man United's trip to the King Power against the Leicester side that is currently ravaged by injury. But to start this episode with, we're going to be going to the first game of the weekend at the Amex. So game week 8 is starting off at the Amex, as I mentioned, Brighton against West Ham. This one is Saturday at 12:30, also live on YouTube if, like me, you are absolutely nowhere near Brighton. I believe the team news is relatively unchanged from last week, although Lee Meng-Wen is going to be unavailable against her parent club. She's obviously on loan at the moment. This is third place versus ninth place in the league. Brighton flying high at the moment. West Ham probably about where people would expect them to be, sort of floating around the bottom half and around quite a close group of teams near the relegation zone. With the top two both playing each other, Brighton could be getting a bit closer to the top two if they manage to get a win. In fact, they're guaranteed to be 3 points, if not 2 points, away from second place. So within a match of at least second place come the end of this game. Brighton are currently unbeaten at home in the WSL this season. They've taken 10 points from their 4 home games, winning 3 and drawing the other one. West Ham, however, although they won last time out at home, it is 9 away games in a row without winning in the WSL for them. West Ham were, however, the team that won this fixture last season. It was a 2-0 win away at Brighton, with Kirsty Smith and Rico Wecki getting the goals, although we obviously know that although West Ham were, I guess, a relatively similar team, you know, they've had the same sort of management in place, things like that. Brighton have now got Daria Vidicic in charge, and they are quite a different prospect than what they once were. Brighton have, under Daria Vidicic, completed the third most passes in the WSL this season, only behind Man City and Arsenal. So they've gone just over 3,100 passes already. And I know players like Guri Bergsvand and Yorelin Korobali are sort of up in that top 5 consistently for the players with the most passes completed, showing how much emphasis he's putting on those players. And it's paying off because, like I said, they're up in third place at the moment. West Ham, however, are obviously further down in the league. They have not got the underlying numbers to show that they are going anywhere further up. They've got the worst progression in the league this year, both with progressive carries, they've only had 55, and progressive passes, 156. They are the worst team in the WSL for both of those metrics. However, they do not go down without a fight. In fact, West Ham have both made and drawn the most fouls in the WSL this season, 79 for both. Vivasei is the player that tops both of those metrics. She has committed 20 fouls and drawn 15 fouls, so she's getting quite involved. She's been involved with 35 fouls already in just 7 matches. Katrina Gorry is another player who I guess is probably one of West Ham's better players, maybe the best player at West Ham so far this season. She's certainly not afraid to get stuck in. She has completed the most tackles in the WSL this season with 23, but there aren't that many stats, to be honest, where either a Brighton player or a West Ham player or the team are sort of the standout performers. They're both performing in a... Brighton are sort of the upper half generally in most of the stats that are underlying numbers for good performance, and West Ham are generally in the bottom half. So I think Brighton will continue that kind of form they're in. I know form is a weird word to use when the last game was 5-0, but they're performing well generally, and I think they'll take that into this game where West Ham aren't, and I'm going to go for a Brighton win 2-0. Now, on to the first of the local derbies this weekend. It is Spurs against Arsenal at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. The North London derby is live on BBC One as well on Saturday afternoon at 1:45. Jess Naz is going to be facing her old club. She made her senior debut for Arsenal back in the 17-18 season. She only made a couple of appearances before moving to Spurs that summer in 2018. It's 7th versus 4th in the league. I think, to be honest, both teams are in a sort of position in the league where they deserve to be. Spurs have been middle of the road this season. They've had some good performances, they've had some bad performances, they've had some average performances. 7th sounds about right. Arsenal, I think in 4th, is lower than where they would like to be, where they perhaps feel they should be given the facilities and given the players they have, but at the end of the day, the performances they put in mean that 4th is probably about right for them. I think they're going to be fighting for that 3rd place alongside Man United, and if they can keep it up, maybe even Brighton come the end of the season. Arsenal could move up into that 3rd place, actually, if they avoid defeat in this game away at Spurs, and Spurs will need a win if they want to move up into the top half. Both North London derbies last season finished 1-0 to the home team. The match at Spurs was when Martha Thomas scored a winner in the game that I think Arsenal generally dominated, but Spurs had a lovely team goal. I was actually watching it back in an interview that the WSL put on YouTube earlier between the Arsenal and some of the Spurs players as well, and they showed the goal from last season. And although I'm an Arsenal fan, I do have to say it was a very, very good goal from Spurs. It's a good team goal. Most of the players on the pitch managed to, or the Spurs players anyway, managed to touch the ball before Celine Bizet eventually set up Martha Thomas for a nice one-touch finish. I think from memory, that might have been the only touch that Spurs had in the box in that game. And they made the most of it, or it was at least the only touch Martha Thomas had, something along those lines. But that was Spurs' only win against Arsenal in the 14 times that they've met in competitive fixtures. They'll be hoping to do a bit better on the 15th and sort of get that relatively one-sided head-to-head going a bit more in their favour. Spurs, however, have lost 4 of their last 5 matches, conceding 3 or more goals in all 4 that they lost. The only match they didn't lose was the 2-1 win against West Ham. That game was a few weeks ago, and Spurs needed a 90th minute own goal to get the win in that game. So that's kind of what I meant earlier when I was saying Spurs probably aren't putting in that many great performances. We obviously saw them being brilliant last year, largely due to the performances of people like Grace Clinton and like Celine Bizet. But I do think they've got enough quality within their side to pick it up a bit. And Robert Villaham seems like not just a lovely person, but a really good coach and a really forward-thinking coach in terms of, you know, the bigger picture, the future of the club. They've got some really high-quality players. Martha Thomas is doing brilliant things, even though she hasn't quite got on the score sheet yet, but that will come. Bethany England's doing well. Evelina Summanen has played fantastically this season. I did call at the start of the season that I thought she was going to be one to step up in Grace Clinton's absence, because her progressive passing last year was one of the best in the league. I know Grace Clinton was definitely the most sort of creative figure, largely with her carrying of the ball. Same with Bizet, I guess, but Summanen's passing is really top drawer. And Ash Neville has been brilliant as well at the back. However, on the topic of Arsenal, they are now unbeaten in 6 away matches in the WSL, so they have a bit of a trend to keep up, as well as their pretty good record against Spurs. Both teams have scored the 3rd most in the WSL this season, both on 12 in the 7 matches they've played. However, it's the defence where they are quite different. Arsenal have only conceded 5 goals in 7 games, which is pretty good, especially when you consider that 2 of those goals came in the opening day at home against Man City, and they've only conceded 3 in the 6 matches since. Spurs, however, have conceded the most goals in the league, even more than Palace, who obviously were on the end of, or the wrong end I should say, of a 7-0 beating from Chelsea. Spurs have conceded 18 goals in just 7 matches, showing that defensively, they're not quite getting it right at the moment. We saw in the last game against Man City, yes, Man City are a brilliant team, but Claire Hunt was having a nightmare trying to do a Bunny Shaw. Another game where Becky Spencer just didn't look that strong in goal. Becky Spencer, as we've touched on before, I think we touched on it on Monday with Why Away She, on the review pod, that Becky Spencer's post-shot XG in the WSL this season, or her performance against it, is the worst in the league, which is basically a good measure of how well a keeper is keeping out the shots on target that they face. So she's recently signed a new contract, keeping her at the club until 2026, but Spurs have, well, it's been rumoured anyway, Spurs have been looking at specific keepers that they will want to get in ahead of, I guess, the second half of the season, because at the moment Becky Spencer is just not in good form. I think it is a case of she's out of form rather than she's not very good, but yes, they do need to do something about it. Either they need to get Becky Spencer playing as well as they know she can do, or they need to bring someone else in. I know there were names of keepers that were from abroad. I do think Lisa Kopp is another one that could be a really good acquisition for them. She's obviously not getting as much pitch time as she would want at Leicester, so we'll have to wait and see what comes there. But they've still got a couple of good players in the defence. Definitely Ash Neville. She's made the most blocks in the WSL this season. She's putting her body about, as she always does. She's a brilliant player. Arsenal, on the other hand, are looking pretty good going forward. They have the most key passes in the league with 93, despite not having the most passes or pass into the final third. So it shows a bit of quality over quantity with them. They're getting, don't get me wrong, they're making a lot of passes. I think they're second most behind City. But their key passes are the most, so obviously they are the key ones. They are the quality ones, they are the ones that set up the chances. Frida Maanum is the third top scorer in the league with 3 goals. She also scored in midweek away at Juventus. She's Arsenal's top scorer this season. 1 behind Guro Reiten in second, and then, only the 4 behind Bunny Shaw already. Out in first place, but she's looking like she's in a really good bit of form at the moment. I think she's a great player anyway. She's not necessarily in the team to score loads of goals, but while it's coming, she may as well make the most of it. In terms of how I think this game's going to go, it's a bit of a difficult one because, well, I think derbies always are. It's one of those where the cliche is that the form book goes out the window because there's a lot of different variables to take into account in any football match, but in a derby, the emotion is not only a variable to take into account, but more a variable and one that you just can't predict. So it's one where the stats don't really mean as much. I know last year both matches were 1-0, but both matches were dominated by Arsenal, and to be honest, they're in a good bit of form at the moment under René Slagers, and I think that's going to continue as well. Whether they'll keep a clean sheet is an interesting one because Spurs are scoring a lot of goals. They're almost at 2 goals a game, same as Arsenal. They've got some players like Beth England and Sumanen and Martha Thomas that are accumulating a lot of XG. But Arsenal also have a really solid defence, and Daphne van Domselaar has the joint most clean sheets in the league this season. So I'm going to go for an Arsenal clean sheet, and I think they can still manage to score a couple of goals. So I'm going to go for a 2-0 Arsenal win. Now on to the final game on Saturday, and probably the biggest game in the WSL, not just this week, but this season so far. It is Sonia Bonpastor's Chelsea hosting Gareth Taylor's Manchester City. It is 5:30 on Saturday evening at Stamford Bridge or live on Sky Sports. Lucy Bronze is going to be hosting the club that she played for and had quite a bit of success under at City. Team news-wise, we don't know if Lauren Hemp is going to be available for this game. She was unavailable midweek, and Gareth Taylor's comments were relatively cagey around whether she'd be around this weekend. Probably the right thing to do if you're the Man City manager. Don't show your cards. But if she is missing from the squad, that's going to be a really big miss for Man City. I think, obviously, Bunny Shaw has been the top scorer in the league and she's been brilliant, but Lauren Hemp is potentially, for me, the player of the season so far in the whole league. So if she is unavailable against the team that have won every game so far, that's going to be a huge loss for them. Leia Alexandri and Naomi Lazelle may potentially be back this week after they've been out for a while, both with injuries. Alexandri, I think, if she is available, could potentially come straight back into the squad because of her quality. Naomi Lazelle, I would imagine, will be a player that maybe would come on the bench, or coming from the bench, I should say, if it's sort of 2 or 3 goals down with 5 minutes to go, that kind of thing, or 2 or 3 goals up. But I don't think she'll be sort of put into the fire of Chelsea if they don't need to. They've obviously still got a fair bit of depth at the back. They've got your Alex Greenwood, they've got Alana Kennedys, Leila Habby and Kirsten Kasparai, who all 4 of them have been brilliant this season. So there's no reason that Lae'zel needs to be rushed back in, although Leia Alexandria, I wouldn't be surprised if we did see her. As I mentioned, it is second place Chelsea against first place Man City. Chelsea have won all 8 competitive matches under Bompastor since she took over at the start of the season with an aggregate score of 29-6. So on average, they're scoring about 3.5 goals a game and are conceding less than 1. In fact, Chelsea have won 27 of the last 28 games at home in the WSL. Their only loss to Man City. City have won 10 of their last 11 away matches in the WSL, and they've won 11 of the 12 matches they've played in all competitions this season. The only one they haven't won was a 2-2 draw at the Emirates, so in all competitions they are unbeaten. Let's not forget there was I don't know if it was surprising or not, but a 2-0 win against Barcelona within that as well. I think certainly one that a lot of people outside Man City were surprised at, me being one of them. Last season, this fixture was Chelsea 0, City 1. It was the only game that Chelsea have lost in their last 28 at home, and it was a Bunny Shaw goal that got the win for City. She is most likely going to be leading the line this weekend, and she'll be looking to add to her tally. She is the top scorer in the league at the moment with 7, ahead of Guro Reiten in second place with just 4. So Guro Reiten needs a hat-trick to catch up at the moment. Chelsea's last league win over City was longer ago than you would think. It was actually just over 2 years ago at the end of September 2022. So although Chelsea are, let's be honest, an absolute steamroller of a team, they thrash whoever they come up against, especially under Sonia Bompastor. Gareth Taylor's Man City are a team that seems to have their number, and we'll have to see what happens this Saturday. I certainly don't want to be one to predict what's going to happen, although, let's be honest, I do that for every game, so we're going to have to come to that in a minute. Chelsea are the top scorers in the WSL this season. That is despite playing a game fewer than everyone else, other than Man United, of course. They are on 23 goals after 6 games. Manchester City are second on 16 after 7. So City are scoring just over 2 goals a game, whereas Chelsea are just shy of 4 goals per game. Almost a third of Chelsea's goals this season have come in the last 15 minutes. I think that's something we can expect to see this weekend as well. There's going to be a bit more sort of chess-like action to the game, I think. It's going to be a bit more cagey. It's going to be a bit more, not set pieces necessarily, but set plays to try and get through sort of each other's defence. I think these are 2 of the best, the best set-up teams in the league. And I think that's going to come through because they're under 2 of the best managers as well. Let's not forget that. City have the most XG per game in the WSL this season at 2.4. Chelsea are not far behind at 2.3. But something that is quite interesting is that Chelsea are the best at competing against their XG. So they score, on average, 1.4 goals more than their XG suggests per game. City are the second best in the league, but are only at 0.4. So compared to your XG, if these 2 teams get the same XG in the game, you would expect Chelsea to get 1 goal more than Man City, which, when you've got players being that clinical, that means a lot. I've already mentioned about Bunny Shaw being the top scorer in the league and Guro Reiten being second, but in third place are Aggie Beaver-Jones, Johanna Rytting-Kaneryd and Jill Roord, amongst a couple of others as well, but on 3 goals. So of the sort of top scorers in the league this year, 5, or the top 5 scorers, I guess you could put it that way, are all Chelsea or Man City players and are all expected to be available for this game. Lauren Hemp is the top assister in the league so far this season with 5. She is obviously potentially unavailable, which could be bad news for City because other than Lauren Hemp, no Man City player has more than 1 assist in the WSL this season. These are also the only 2 teams to score in every match so far, and they are also the 2 sides that have kept 4 clean sheets, which is the joint most in the WSL, alongside Arsenal and Man United. So there is an element of these teams can't stop scoring, but there is also an element of they keep a lot of clean sheets. It'd be interesting to see which one of those is going to come through for both teams. Are both teams going to score? Are either team, maybe even both teams, going to keep a clean sheet with their excellent defensive work? City have had the most possession in the WSL so far this season with 69% per game on average, which is huge. The next most is about, I think it's just under 60. I think it's Arsenal on 59, and then Chelsea are in third on 58%. So Chelsea's 58% is still pretty good. Don't sleep on that, because that is a good amount of possession. Shows that they do dominate matches. But City are seriously dominating matches. When you can play 7 matches and still average possession of almost 70%, that is madness. In terms of how I think this match is going to go, I think both teams are going to come out the blocks. I think they're both going to try and get an early goal, and I think they might do. I'm going to say, normally I would just give a full-time score kind of prediction on this, but what I'm going to say in this game is that I think this match is going to be 1-1 at half-time. I think they're both going to come out, and I think they're both going to manage to penetrate each other's defences. I don't think anyone's going to keep a clean sheet, but I think it's going to be a bit of a cagier second half. I think both teams are going to have a bit of a uncomfortable half-time talk. I think there's going to be a lot of stress in that half-time because both teams know how important this game is going to be, and I think they're going to be extra sort of defensively solid. But one thing I have noticed is that, although I haven't mentioned it for a few weeks, Gareth Taylor is still the manager that's making the fewest substitutions in the league, and he is also a manager that is bringing his players on at the latest point in the league, or at least is one of the latest points in the league. So yes, it is. I've just checked it. He brings his subs on average at 70 minutes, which is quite late on. Only Man United and Palace bring their players on later on average. So I think this could be the sort of thing where that's starting to catch up with him a little bit, that he's not making many substitutions. He's only making 3 a game on average, whereas Chelsea are making 5 a game almost, only 1 off that. They've only had 1 match when they haven't made all 5 subs, and in that one they made 4. I think the Man City players are more likely to be tired towards the end of the game because of that kind of thing. So I think Chelsea are going to win it late on. As I mentioned, a third of their goals have come in the last 15 minutes so far this season. So my entire prediction is going to be a 1-1 at half-time and a Chelsea 2-1 at full-time. So that is the 3 games on Saturday wrapped up. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to have a look at the other 3 games this weekend on Sunday. Hello listener, and welcome back to Decoding the WSL. You are listening to the Game Week 8 preview, looking ahead to this weekend's games, and now we're moving on to Sunday's games. We're going to start with the 2 p.m. kickoff. This one is at Villa Park. It's Aston Villa against Palace. It is also live on YouTube. Annabelle Blanchard is a doubt for this game after picking up a knock last week. Laura Kaminsky said they didn't really know too much about it at the time, so we haven't had an update, well, as of the time of recording. Obviously it's Wednesday evening at the moment, but we will see whether she'll be available or not, because she's been a very important player for Palace this season. It is 10th versus 11th in the league, and one of these teams could well be the bottom team of the WSL after this weekend. That does depend on Everton though. They would need at least a point for one of these teams to finish bottom, maybe even a win. It is the 6th time these 2 teams have ever met, with Aston Villa winning 4 of the previous 5 and the other one being a draw. So Crystal Palace in their history have never beaten Aston Villa. The last game these 2 played was the League Cup back in October, so only just over a month ago. Aston Villa won that one 2-0 with goals from Kirsty Hansen and Katie Robinson. Villa are, however, yet to win a match in the WSL this season. Palace's only win was in the away game, which they are obviously doing in this game as well. That one was away at Leicester, another team struggling down the bottom end of the table, struggling a lot more than I would expect them to, similar to Aston Villa. Palace have the worst expected goals conceded in the WSL this season with 15.2 in just 7 games. That is quite a lot. They, as a result of that, have the worst expected goal difference. So that is the difference between your expected goals accumulated and the expected goals conceded. That is minus 8.3. It's probably then unsurprising to hear that Shea Yanez has made the most saves in the league, because she has also faced the most shots on target. Palace on the ball are actually not that great either. They are the only team to complete less than 2,000 passes in the WSL this season, and they have the worst pass completion at just over 73%. Now, we hear a lot nowadays, rather than substitutes, we hear about finishers. And that is true for no one more than Abby Larkin of Crystal Palace, because she is the only player that has been subbed on in all 7 matches so far this season. There is another player that's been subbed on in every game, that is Simia Wujo, but she is obviously at Man United, so has only played 6 games so far. Aston Villa, for all their sort of struggles near the bottom of the table, are actually looking defensively pretty solid. In fact, they have not had an error leading to a shot so far this season. That is something that you would maybe expect from, your Chelseas, your Man Cities, those sort of clubs. But actually, even Chelsea have had 4 errors leading to a shot so far this season. Manchester United 4, Arsenal have had a couple, etc. Aston Villa and Man City are the only 2 teams yet to have that. So how do I think this match is going to go? I think this is going to be quite close. I would not be surprised if Palace got something out of the game, but I'm going to go for a Villa win. I think they're going to get their first win of the season. It is a little bit dependent on whether I think Annabelle Blanchard is going to play. As it looks at the moment, I would imagine that if she's 75, 80% fit, they'll probably play her because it is a really tight game at the bottom of the table. It's kind of a 6-pointer. So I think she'll play, but I don't think that'll be enough to get them over the line against Villa. I think Palace will get a goal, but as I mentioned, I think Villa will get the win, so I'm going to go for a 2-1 to Aston Villa. There are 2 more matches to focus on this week, both of them at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. We're going to start off with the Merseyside Derby. This one is at Goodison and also live on YouTube. There are a couple of players playing against their former side. Obviously, Taylor Hines used to be at Everton many moons ago, and Melissa Lawley is hosting the team that she used to play for after moving from the Blues, to the Blues from the Reds over the summer. For Liverpool, Fuka Nagano is possibly back in the side. She obviously missed a game or 2 recently, but if she is back, she'll be a great presence for them to have again because she is a real tenacious player, especially against someone like Claire Wheeler in the Everton midfield. Could really be that sort of player to counteract any relatively mild, let's be honest, threat that Everton have. Everton are unfortunately languishing down in 12th place for them so far this season. Liverpool just about in the top half in 6th. I think Liverpool are going to be relatively happy with where they are this season. They'll be wanting to push on, obviously. They lost a few big players over the summer though, so the fact that they haven't, dropped as far as like an Aston Villa or someone like that has, I think will be positive for them and they'll still be wanting to build off that. Everton are certainly wanting to build off their performances so far this season. No one wants to be bottom. In fact, Everton, their biggest flaw, I think, as we've mentioned multiple times, is scoring goals. Everton have actually got more points this season than goals. They've got 3 points from 3 draws, whereas they've only scored 2 goals, and obviously one of those being an own goal, the other one being Hano Koyashi's header, the Japanese player scoring Everton's, well, I guess the first player to score anyway for Everton in their last game out. Liverpool are yet to keep a clean sheet this season, so again, there's another sort of battle of, well, I guess it's a team that can't score against a team that can't stop conceding. It'll be interesting to see which one of those comes out on top. Liverpool don't necessarily have a problem with scoring, however, they're not necessarily up there for the highest scorers in the league, but they do have some players that can get in the goals. In fact, they have 4 players in Taylor Hines, Marie Herbinger, Cornelia Capox and Olivia Smith that have as many goals as Everton this season, all on 2. Everton have not won in their last 7 home games in the WSL and their last 8 games in all competitions. The last time Liverpool didn't score in the WSL was back in March, which was, surprise, surprise, 0-0 at Goodison Park, their last game against Everton. Chelsea and Man City are the only teams Liverpool have lost to in the last 16 away matches in the WSL. So unless they're facing what is, well, one of the top 2 last season, looking like going to be one of the top 2 this season, they seem to do pretty well and are pretty good at avoiding defeat even if they don't necessarily win every match. Liverpool actually don't have that great a record against Everton in recent times, especially in the league. They haven't won in the league against Everton since May 2019, and that was a 3-1 victory at Liverpool. Now, here's a stat that isn't something that I tend to look at that much, but jumped out at me a bit when I was looking through the data for this pod, which was that Everton have a really big difference between their XG and their post-shot XG. In fact, it's the biggest difference in the league. So XG, I'm sure you know, is the chances of a shot going in, basically. They are on 5.5, so they should have scored 5.5 from the shots they've had. However, their post-shot XG, which is the same as XG but recalculated to only include shots on target, you'd expect it to still be about 5.5, maybe slightly higher or slightly lower, but roughly the same as the XG. However, their post-shot XG is 3.2, which shows that although they're getting in enough good positions to score 5.5 goals, they're not actually getting enough shots on target and testing the keepers in a good enough way to score that many goals, and the keepers aren't having to work as hard. Their post-shot XG is only 3.2. So if their players aren't getting shots on target in good positions, that obviously then makes it that little bit harder to score. Everton, unsurprisingly, they also have the worst shot on target percentage in the league at just 27%. In fact, Everton's shooting, their stats get worse than that. How about this one? Everton have taken 63 shots in the WSL and only scored 1 goal, which is obviously 63 shots per goal. That is the worst in the WSL by some way. The second worst is Leicester on 24.5 shots per goal, and no one else is worse than 15. For reference, Chelsea have the best record at this of just under 5 shots per goal. In fact, Everton, to be about average in the league, would need to score with their next 7 shots, because although they're having a decent amount of shots, they're getting a okay amount of XG, 5.5. It's not amazing, but it's not terrible. They're not getting it on target, and they're not scoring from their XG. So, yeah, they need to get 7 shots, their next 7 shots in, to have an average amount of goals per shot, or shots per goal. Something that is a little more positive, I think, about these two teams is that they are the two teams that give the most time to their substitutions. So Everton give the most time to their subs of 28 minutes on average, and Liverpool give 25 minutes to their subs on average, making subs at therefore the 62nd and the 65th minute. That is, I think, something that shows that the managers are trying to be relatively pragmatic. They're not afraid to mix up largely the personnel, occasionally maybe even mixing up the tactics a little bit. I've already spoken in this pod about teams like Man City, who like to keep their team pretty rigid. Arsenal did this a little bit, especially when Jonas was in charge. They don't want to move their players around too much. They don't want to make too many subs. They don't want to mix anything up, especially when the games are close. But Everton and Liverpool, in both Brian Sorensen and Matt Beard, I think are being a bit more pragmatic with it and are, if nothing else, being a bit more sensible with their squad rotation. I think it also shows that they don't have as many kind of standout players within the squad, that they're sort of like, no, this player needs to start and they need to stay on as long as possible, if not finish the game. They're actually thinking that, yes, Liverpool have got a really good midfield, but actually the players that are on the bench are just as good and fill in, and he's not worried about the quality dropping. So that's just something I want to highlight, because I think that's a really good, positive moment for both teams. In terms of how I think this game's going to go, I think it's going to be close. Liverpool are obviously way higher in the table. They're having a much better start to the season, but they've drawn a lot of games and they haven't scored an incredible amount. So against a team like Everton, who are defensively not that bad, they're not amazing, that's why they're 12th, but they're not that bad. I don't think Liverpool are going to run away with this. Similar to the Arsenal-Spurs game that I've already spoken about, emotions will come back into it a lot more. That's the reasons why derbies are so fun, basically, to watch, because it's not necessarily the better team that always gets the best result. So that's why I think it's going to be close. Obviously, last season, this fixture was 0-0. Everton have got the same manager. They've got a few of the same players. I suppose their main players. Anyway, some of those have changed, but I think they've got enough to keep it close. But I do think Liverpool are going to win this, so I'm going to go for a 1-0 Liverpool win. The final game of the weekend that we're going to cover is also at 3 o'clock on Sunday. It is at the King Power as Leicester host Man United, also live on YouTube. Leah Galton may be going to return for Man United in this game, but not yet sure. We may get something out of Mark Skinner closer to the match when he does his press conference. Leicester, on the other hand, have a more, should we say, rigid injury list because they've got some more long-term injuries. They do have Shannon O'Brien and Lena Peterman back running again. Shannon O'Brien was videoed on the pitch running this week, and Lena Peterman was filmed on the treadmill, so that is good news for both of them. But they're not expected to be back this week, maybe this side of Christmas, but we'll have to wait and see. Naomi Mouchon, the sort of summer centre-forward signing, as well as Jutta Rantala and Sam Tierney, are all out long-term as well. Leicester are, as I mentioned already, quite depleted when it comes to their forward options because, like I mentioned, Shannon O'Brien and Lena Peterman are two players from last season who did really well going forward when they got some time on the pitch, but are both out. Jutta Rantala is out for a long time. She is their, I think, main attacking force. And Naomi Mouchon, who looked really good in pre-season, didn't really get up and running enough in the WSL, I don't think, yet. And obviously is now out for, I believe, the season with an ACL injury. So we'll have to see how this goes for them. Sam Tierney obviously out as well. She is not a attacking player. I don't think she'll mind me saying that, but she is really important, both defensively and in the sort of creativity sense for Leicester, sort of running that centre midfield. And I think, I don't know necessarily, but I think a really good voice for the team as well. They do have other players that can fill that role. They've got Sophie Howard, she's the first one that comes to mind. I think Julie Thibault is probably quite good at that as well, maybe even Janina Leitzig. But yeah, those forward players especially are the players that Leicester are missing out on because they don't really have much of a replacement for them. If you want to hear a bit more on that, do go and listen to the episode I did on Monday with the YOAC podcast because they are two Leicester women fans and they speak about it really well. In terms of this match, it is obviously 8th versus 5th in the league. United could, however, go 3rd with a win or potentially even a draw if Brighton and Arsenal both lose. They have played 8 league matches before now. 7 of those have been Man United wins. The only draw coming in October 2023, so last season, and there's never been a Leicester win. They are the two teams that have, on average, had the fewest goals in their matches, so sort of conceded plus scored. Both these two teams have less than 2 goals on average, and they are the only two teams with less than 2, so don't expect this to be a super high-scoring game. Manchester United are yet to concede in the first half this season. So they have scored a few first half goals, but in the first half they fight hard and they do not concede. In fact, they are unbeaten in all competitions this season. Leicester, however, only have 1 win in their last 15 WSL games. The last home game, which was a 1-0 versus Everton, ended a run of 6 losses in a row. That was a 1-0 win, I should say, versus Everton. Leicester are also, interestingly, the team that has used the most players in the WSL this season with 21, whereas Manchester United, similar to last season, are the team that have used the fewest, just 18. I think only using 18 is a system that Mark Skinner seems to have. They used the fewest players last season. I think it was 20 off the top of my head. Leicester using a lot more I think that's a product of the situation they're in with the amount of injuries. They just have to use different players. They've obviously put some players out of position as well. There was, I think, for anyone that's watched a lot of Leicester games, it'll stick in your mind that Asmita Ali and Yanis Cayman did play as a front 2 at one point this season, both obviously normally left backs. So yeah, Leicester are just in that point at the moment, struggling with their strikers, and that shows because they have got the lowest XG in the WSL this season at just 4.1 after 7 games, so about 0.6 per game. Everton, as I've already mentioned, have 5.5 and they are the second lowest, so they're a bit off that. However, defensively, well, I should say not defensively necessarily, but in terms of goalkeeping, these two teams are actually the ones that have had the best goalkeeper performances. So I already mentioned the post-shot XG and how that, or the amount of goals you concede compared to your post-shot XG is a really good metric for defining sort of shot saving and goalkeeping performance. Manchester United, as I put out this week on socials and got quite a lot of mentions from Manchester United fans saying, oh my god, Fallon Joyce is amazing, but that is because our midfield and defence are a bit shit. She has the best overperformance this season with 5.1, so she has prevented 5.1 goals that should have gone in given the shots on target that she has faced. Leicester, however, they have the third best keeper for this in Janina Leitzig, but obviously have split their matches, 5 for Leitzig and 2 for Kopp. So I've combined that all together, and that is plus 3.9 for Leicester. So 3.9 goals prevented. They should have conceded 4 more than they have, which when you're already near the bottom of the table, you know, I know they're 8th, but they're only, I think, 2 points off bottom. that's really important, that your keepers are putting in such a good effort and are performing at a really high quality, especially when you've not got much attacking threat. It's not just the goalkeepers that are doing the defensive work for Leicester, though. They have made the most tackles as a squad. CJ Bott and Sophie Howard are up there. They're not quite the first place, but they're up there for the most tackles per player. And Ruby Mace has made the most interceptions in the squad. She's obviously been a very versatile player this season, starting out in midfield when she could, but obviously has played a lot further up the pitch than she normally would. But she's still, doing a good job with her defensive work, even if she's not quite got on the score sheet just yet. In terms of how I think this match is going to go, I think, as I normally say, Leicester will fight hard. They always do. They're really good defensively. They're really hard to break down, but I do think Manchester United are going to have too much for them and are going to break through. I wouldn't be surprised to see this at 0-0 at half-time, but I think once United get a goal, Leicester then needs to go and try and score to get anything out of the game, and I think in doing that, when Leicester start to attack, that's when Man United are a team that are even more likely to score. So I'm going to say probably 0-0 at half-time, but I'm going to go for a 2-0 full-time score for Man United. So there we are, listener. That is my Game Week 8 preview, looking ahead to this weekend's games on Saturday and Sunday. I will say something to keep an eye on this week is your Fantasy WSL, because it is the first double game week of the season, with that Chelsea-Man United game being rearranged for the following weekend and is the only WSL match on that weekend. So any Chelsea obviously playing against Man City, Man United, and then Man United players against Leicester and then Chelsea, they're going to be players to keep in your team because they obviously get double the amount, and probably one of those players or from those teams is someone that you should be captaining. But just wanted to remind you of that, and obviously do go and join the Stattorino League. I'll put the code for it in the show notes, so if you're not already in it, go join it. I think there's about 200, maybe slightly more of us in there. I am absolutely flying at the moment after a really good week, so this is the time that I want to promote it, because I think I'm up into something like, I think I'm in the top 20 worldwide, which I'm super proud of. Although there are a couple of you, I don't know if you listen to the pod or not, but there are a couple of you in this mini league that are, despite the fact that I'm 15th, I've just checked, that are sitting above me in the mini league as well. So Cedric Bombs and LD, if you're listening, well done, because you are doing brilliantly this season. So thank you, listener, for tuning in to Decoding the WSL. I always appreciate someone being here, because otherwise it would just be me talking to no one. If you did enjoy today's episode, do make sure to hit follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It does really help as well if you can give us a 5-star review, because it goes a long way in helping others find the show. We're still trying to grow the show. We're still trying to make it bigger. And as we get a bit more, a few more people listening, we can start doing a few more, let's say, extracurricular things, getting some different guests on, maybe speaking to a few players, things like that. You can also join the conversation, stay up to date by following the pod on Instagram at Decoding the WSL, and there is now a Reddit page, r/Decoding the WSL, to keep up to date with any new releases. For even more stats, insight, numbers, WSL stuff, that kind of jazz, do follow me at Stattorino. I put a lot of stuff on X and Instagram, a little bit on Threads as well. And if you do want to get in touch, just drop a message on socials or send an email to decodingthewslpod@gmail.com, because I always love to hear your thoughts, ideas for pod episodes, any questions, that kind of thing. It's all good stuff. So yes, thank you, listener. Thank you again for joining me this evening, and I will speak to you at the next one.